It is shocking in some respects because you and I are both living this every day. But I realize those basic stories really are not out there. And what we're both really talking about is a culture that embraces entrepreneurship and innovation. And in Western New York, this is really tricky because there is still a mentality that working for a large employer is a lifelong dream.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, whenever you may be listening, and welcome to Latitude, the 43 North podcast. I'm your host, the voice of the Buffalo startup scene and digital media manager here at 43 North, Nate Benson. I'm so thrilled you're listening. Thank you so much for subscribing, for liking the podcast, liking the tweets, retweeting, sharing on LinkedIn. We have quite a few listeners. Last month, actually, in February, was our biggest month of this podcast. We had a huge subscription growth rate from what I can see in the analytics. We had the most downloads of the podcast, too. And I just want to say thank you. Thank you for believing in this podcast. Thank you for believing in the Buffalo startup scene. And thank you for contributing to the Buffalo startup scene. Thank you to all of my guests. We're looking forward to another year because you know what? We're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of this podcast. And what better way to do it than with something special? So set your calendars. March 28th, 6 to 8 p.m. here at the 43 North Incubator on 640 Ellicott Street in downtown Buffalo. It's Latitude Live, a live edition of this podcast, Q&A from the audience, a little bit of food, a little bit of beverage, great conversation, bad dad jokes from me, and a very special guest, Eba Masood from Terra AI, 2017 winner. Learn about how this company, who's already doing business with Ford and other Fortune 500 companies, she's got a great story. I don't want to spoil it here, but it's really probably going to be a great night. And you know what? I can guarantee you it's going to be a great night. And you know what? Seats are going to be limited, so head on over to the 43 North website. We're going to be promoting it there. How do you reserve these free tickets? Head on over to 43north.org. Again, they're free, but space is limited. I don't know how many seats we're going to have, but I can tell you it's not going to be a lot. It's not going to be, thousands of people in here. It's going to be a close, intimate setting. Again, with me, Eba Masood from Terra AI. Really looking forward to it. So again, March 28th, 6 to 8 p.m., here at the 43 North Incubator, 640 Ellicott Street in downtown Buffalo. But you know what I'm also looking forward to? This episode of the podcast. We've got a great guest this week, Marnie LaVigne from LaunchNY, a great ambassador to the Buffalo startup scene and a great organization doing amazing things for companies, startup companies, early seed companies here in Buffalo. So we're not going to waste any more time with me rambling and get right to my conversation with Marnie from LaunchNY. Marnie, hello. How are you today?
Very good, Nate. Thanks so much for having me.
As we do in every episode, for those who might not know you, give us the quick pitch of who you are and what you do.
Sure. I'm the president and CEO of LaunchNY. And for those not familiar, LaunchNY is a nonprofit venture development organization. That phrase isn't so familiar to folks, but essentially we are a nonprofit that is committed to growing the region economically through entrepreneurship. More specifically, we help high-growth potential companies by providing free mentoring. And now, I'm pleased to say, we have the most active seed fund in upstate New York.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, we're very committed to helping individual companies, but we also are looking to build the entrepreneurial, what we call ecosystem, because we really are looking for this to start naturally occurring here, that you have entrepreneurs who are growing, investors, customers, that it's all happening here like it's happening in Silicon Valley or in Massachusetts and Boston, areas like that.
How did LaunchNY kind of manifest? What was the beginning?
Great question. It actually was an organic effort. There were 3 of us who sort of took the energy from our colleagues in recognizing that we had a problem, that we had a real gap in the fact that we have incredible universities here, innovators. In fact, the statistics are something like 50% of the research and development spend in this state is in upstate New York. So why were we receiving and have been receiving less than 3% of the venture capital that is invested in New York State annually? It was a mismatch basically.
Doesn't add up, yeah.
Doesn't add up. So guess what? You said these are not only economic development efforts to create these companies with these new innovative products, but it's life-changing. So for myself, I actually came from a background of having come out of an academic setting, and in my doctoral work, we started a health information technology company that helped people manage chronic health conditions.
You beat me to my next question, what your background was.
Yeah, so many people will say, "What the heck kind of background is this?" But I would tell you that having traveled the road unexpectedly from being a graduate student who had a mentor who was certainly going to stay in academia, but for myself, really excited about the fact that we could change people's lives through technology and a high growth business opportunity. I jumped at it, and that was back in the 90s, believe it or not. Sounds like a dinosaur age. But so for me, I went from, I guess an academic to an entrepreneur and ultimately into economic development, realizing that the experience I had is something that we could multiply and replicate over and over again with the incredible innovation in this region.
Is that one of the issues that Upstate's had over the last few decades where, because we have great research institutions across the region, but it seems like, and this is kind of just my gut telling me this, that it's good at breeding people who stay in the academia kind of circle of things and not actually commercialize their discoveries. Is that a fair assessment?
It is a fair assessment, and that's exactly the problem that my colleagues and I were trying to solve. We realized that to have a successful high growth potential business, you need to have that technology or that market opportunity solution, whatever that is. But that's not enough. It's one leg to a three-legged stool. The other legs are the talent and the capital. And we haven't had those. So we know, one of the stories we always told is the fact that the prostate-specific antigen test, the PSA test for prostate cancer detection, that was invented here, but it wasn't commercialized here. And that was one among many inventions that we would say, gee, we kind of missed the boat on creating an economy that takes us end to end. And why it's so important is not only does it impact the economy in terms of making us a more prosperous community, but everybody in the community can work in these industries. You do not have to be, have a professional degree or, have some specialty in a STEM area to participate. As you know yourself, the marketing and getting the word out aspect is really important. Operations, human resources. So I became very interested in sort of leading those companies forward. So we said, what is the rest of the country doing about this? And we found that there were best practices in states right next door in Ohio and Pennsylvania. And we actually received federal and local funding, particularly laud the Oshai Foundation and National Grid for stepping up at an earlier time than you would expect to say, yes, we should figure out how Buffalo can make this happen. And in fact, LaunchNY, in that analysis and working with a group called Jumpstart out of Cleveland, who'd been doing this type of venture development organization work for at least a decade, they assisted us in identifying that we would even be better off if we worked not just as Buffalo, but the whole western half of New York State. So LaunchNY is a nonprofit venture development organization covering the entire western half of New York State. In fact, we're the only one. So Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, and the southern tier. So while we're headquartered in Buffalo, we have mentors who provide free expert service across all of those communities every day.
Now, Marnie, as a Auburn, New York native, Syracuse would be central New York, but no, it's certainly lumped in because really anyone downstate, anything north of Central Park is upstate. So that's
it is, and
geography is weird in New York that way.
Well, and what I can tell you is that there's a variety of reasons we ended up with the funding that we have. We are not funded at all by New York State. Mm-hmm. Our funding is through more than 50% private funding, but federal. Yeah. So because of that, we actually cover what in New York State terms would be 4 regional economic development council areas. So we have 27 counties, population close to 4 million, drive time probably 3 hours. But the other regions of upstate have often said, we need what you're doing. Mm-hmm. And what are we doing? What we're doing is more of a one-on-one complement to what our many, many new and proliferating accelerator programs. So we certainly can visit incubators where you have people come and, quote, live for a period of time and get some assistance in growing their business. But I would tell you that the need doesn't end there. And so we really are an umbrella organization that tailors the timing of one-on-one consultation and work very closely with our partners. So I would also say that it's confusing how many partners there are. So part of our job is also to help steer people to the right source of resource, whether that be capital, talent, facilities, R&D assistance, whatever it might be. Many people will ask, what kind of companies are you really talking about? For us, we are what we call sector agnostic. So any high growth potential business is a potential client of Launch New York. Being a client of Launch New York, you're not signing a contract. What you're doing is agreeing that you would work with us through what we have really taken on as best practice, the business model canvas, which is now being used internationally as kind of the one-page business plan. So what we do is look for companies who can be in any sector, and then you might ask, what is high growth potential? What does that actually mean? It means, for us, a quick definition, have to be $10 million a year in revenues by 5 to 7 years of your forecast. Okay, so obviously a forecast is exactly that. But it really sort of separates the fact that there are some terrific Main Street businesses. We just don't specialize in assisting those. We have some phenomenal partners. In fact, we have become a community development financial institution, which is, for short, called a CDFI. Acronyms galore, right? Why does it matter? What do we care about these CDFIs? Other communities around the country have been helping Main Street business and high growth business with CDFIs for a very long time. And Buffalo and upstate New York really has kind of been missing the boat on grabbing that federal support. So we now have a consortium of Main Street oriented, even micro enterprise loan providers in Western New York, all the way to ourselves being venture funding. And in fact, that's very unusual, but it allows us to say, what size business are you seeking? So we need a coachable entrepreneur. We need someone with an idea that has high growth potential, and really a willingness to work with a business model canvas. And we set our folks up through a client intake call. We talk about what are your needs and pair them up with one of our folks locally. I will tell you, though, that we found that we have so many innovative businesses, from IT and even mobile apps all the way to more esoteric businesses with nanotechnologies, right? And certainly a lot of life sciences as well. We need a lot of different mentoring. So we've also added to our crop of nearly various times up to 24 entrepreneurs and residents locally. We've added to that with access to a national mentor network of over 2,000 experts. Wow. So we can get you
who you need to
who
talk
you need
to.
when you need them.
That's fantastic. I just want to go back to something you said earlier, and then we'll kind of get into how good of a year 2017 was for the portfolio companies. But you mentioned a good chunk of your funding comes from the federal government, and I don't like to get political on the show, but I'm just curious, how is there any uneasiness, given kind of the gridlock of decision making coming out of the federal government for years, not just this year, but for the last several years? With an organization like this and as ambitious goals there are, how do you kind of navigate those treacherous waters of, bipartisanship to ultimately do good for a community?
Wow, we could do a whole show on this. I will tell you, I certainly never expected that I would need to understand government affairs to the level that I do, but my work previous to Launch New York prepared me for that. The reality is this is a bipartisan issue. Supporting economic growth, everybody's on board. And so I am very involved nationally now, and I'm on national boards for organizations who represent this effort around the new economy. And so it is a very intricate, politically laden dynamic that we have to work through. But I will tell you that both sides of the aisle really do support this agenda. Exactly how they do that is something we have to educate them on. So we are spending, and I would say my colleagues like myself around the country, in fact, I'll be heading out to D.C. For meetings in a couple of weeks. We are spending a lot of time educating folks about how you build these businesses and how a community like Western New York's Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, how do cities like this who have not had this history of innovation, and we're not known for a gig economy yet,
right?
How do we get there? So is it hard work to convince them? Yes, but when you have stories like we have among our clients who have life-changing products and who are making jobs happen in a region that needs them, it hits home. So I will say we need to continue to educate all the time. One other note I would just say is we have had a lot of programs for small business for decades and decades.
Yeah.
And those programs primarily are really meant for Main Street businesses. That's just the way it's been. And even a more traditional Main Street business. Things are changing. So in some respects, what we really need to do is transform some of those legacy funding programs to support the kind of work that you and I are involved in every day.
Yeah, it's funny, you mentioned, educating, the decision makers in DC, and, we run into the same issues at 43 North. It's just the general public, that constant education. We could talk till we're blue in the face about it, and we feel like we're getting somewhere, but then really you go a block in any direction, and someone's like, wait, what? Huh? What's happening? There's still that barrier you have to break down.
It is shocking in some respects because you and I are both living this every day. But I realize those basic stories really are not out there. And what we're both really talking about is a culture that embraces entrepreneurship and innovation. And in Western New York, this is really tricky because there is still a mentality that working for a large employer is a lifelong dream, and that's really how everybody should grow up and proceed with their career. So when I address audiences of folks just really entering their career path, I say, well, how many of you went to college and had your parents say, let me pay for 4 years of college, maybe more, and then you go start up a business or go join a startup that we don't know exactly how it'll be. No one raises their hands. So I do think that we need to take some of those cultural factors from a Silicon Valley and see how they work here. We're our own unique animal. Our quality of life is driven a lot by people who have sort of a different orientation. So I think we have to find our place in that new economy.
So let's talk about the portfolio. How big's the portfolio, and how good of a year was 2017?
Great. And and speaking of portfolio, we are very clear to differentiate ourselves from a typical venture capital firm. And many people do say, oh, hey, I just need money, I'll go to LaunchNY. And venture capital, that's what you do. Yep. So we are not of that traditional model. So our portfolio, in fact, I speak about it in two buckets. Originally, we started in 2012 providing pro bono mentoring. We did not have a seed fund, though the intention was always to start the seed fund. So we have serviced over 750 clients since 2012 across the 27 counties. Wow. So it's a big number.
Yeah.
And with that, we've seen, tremendous impact here in terms of employing over 2,500 people. Among those companies, we've seen over $260 million in capital come to the region because of what those companies have done. Incredible kinds of impacts like that. At the same time, we knew that every single one of those companies, because we do take the companies at a very early stage, they were all struggling for capital. Yeah. And our endorsement as a mentor for the company is certainly a wonderful thing. But for us to be able to see to getting some key proof of concept milestones done, if you got to get that first product done, the first version, we had a company with a product that was manufactured, it broke. So we said, let's help you get this done right with our mentors and our capital. So the seed fund has taken off like crazy, and I will laud my team. I'll give them the credit all day long. They're really incredible in working with these companies because venture capital seems glamorous. This is really hard work. You're working with a lot of people who have not done this before, and you're dealing with small amounts of money. So we typically will fund anywhere from, say, $12,500 to $50,000 for a company, and we can go higher than that. We're actually finding that we don't have to invest quite as much because we're attracting so much co-investment. So we currently have about 24 companies in the portfolio spread across that entire region, a little more heavy in the Buffalo area. Those companies have been able to work with us very effectively to the point where more than half of those investments have co-investors. So we are actually to the point of growing the ecosystem and growing the investor community. We have about 30 different investors who've co-invested in those 24 companies. So it's very exciting to us to be able to help kind of bring along the rest of the community as well. And those companies are all the way from, IT software at an enterprise level or consumer, even some of them fundraising software. Others that are combining software with devices. 3AM Solutions is one that we recently announced. They've just gotten up to now 6 employees, which, this is the kind of growth this is where it all starts, right?
Yeah.
But the other end of the spectrum is we have companies who have diagnostic tests for cancer patients so they can know what are the best drugs for them to be using. We have materials companies whose products could be used in a whole variety of settings. So for us, this portfolio is very young. Most of those, almost all except for one of those investments is still under 18 months. So the fact that we've seen so much happen with these companies, we all like to talk about one of our first investments, Rachel's Remedies.
I was just about to bring her up.
She's
We're on the same
terrific.
wavelength today.
Totally. This is great. I mean, she is
killing it.
She is killing it. But from day one when we met her, she's an attorney.
Yeah.
Right. So you take someone who needs to be able to walk down a path that is unfamiliar in most ways. But she's a great example of someone who has used about every form of mentorship that we've provided, including FDA regulatory guidance. And so that helped her very early on. And then each step she has taken, we've actually done follow-on investments in Rachel's Remedies as well. So that one, several. And that's where we are different than many other groups. We're able to walk hand in hand with the entrepreneurial support and mentoring, but also with the funding and the co-investor support, since that's sort of a lift in and of itself. So Rachel, at this point, obviously is, providing a product that helps women prevent and relieve problems related to nursing when they have a new baby. And this really is such a major issue when you see that only 16% of women nourish their children in what is the healthiest and, frankly, the most cost-effective way. So this really has a lot of impacts on populations across the spectrum, no matter what socioeconomic status they are. So she now has an international distribution. With Dr. Brown's, and this is kind of a dream come true for us. So our portfolio companies are still young, those receiving the seed funding. We have other companies, even in ACV, with whom we had an early work, which, obviously they've totally taken off.
Yeah.
We're often sort of left in the wings, right?
Yeah.
And that's an okay place to be. We have another company in the Southern Tier called GiveGab, who was an early client of ours, didn't receive seed funding. We didn't have the fund at that time, but they've actually acquired another fundraising software company. So they're a platform for nonprofits. And in fact, when we did our own crowdfunding campaign for our seed fund, we use the GiveGab platform. So buying locally is a big part of how we like to operate as well.
And I'll take the time to do a cheap plug. We talked to Rachel. It was one of the first episodes of the podcast, so you can go into the archive and check her out. Another LaunchNY portfolio is Thimble. Had a great year last year, just moved into a space at the Great Arrow building and are continuing to grow.
Yeah, and what you just said is the key, and I think that's where we have to change the mindset locally. Those are huge advances. Whereas in traditional media, in a community built around larger corporations or organizations, simply making a move might not be such a big deal, but it is. When you graduate from that incubator environment, huge opportunity.
I mean, they went from 3 desks and stuff kind of overflowing on each end to a space, albeit it's not a massive warehouse, but it's a space they can work out of and call home. And I think that's just like you said, a huge win.
It's a huge win, and I would say to you, now that we have ramped up to where LaunchNY was always intended to be, we are looking at a variety of opportunities to grow and to fill some of the gaps, because for entrepreneurship to really serve our community, it has to be inclusive. And we realize that it's very easy for sort of the cool, edgy part of entrepreneurship to grow, and some of the community kind of looking from the outside in and not knowing how to get involved. So when we look at our portfolio, we're very proud of the fact that we can actually, depending on how you slice and dice the data, up to 30% of our portfolio is minority or women-owned businesses.
That's fantastic.
And some of it may be because we are a women-led organization. My fund manager is a female. That's such a rarity in this country. And so I feel that that's something we can bring more to the table. So certainly we want to do more to help support those entrepreneurs who are underserved in the sense that they've not had role models, they've maybe not had the means to kind of get started. So we see ourselves really at the forefront there. I would also say that we are looking to expand our funding vehicles, and co-investors being able to come to a Launch New York, look to us for the heavy lift. We do a very extensive due diligence process. We even do a leadership assessment. We realize at this early stage, most of these companies will not end up succeeding with the first product concept that they really started building. So for us, understanding that that team is coachable and adaptable, something like an adaptability quotient appears to be sort of where entrepreneurship needs to find those gems out there of people who are excited and able to be successful in leading an entrepreneurial organization. So we certainly want to continue to grow the investment community, but we also are looking to attract expats who want to invest in the region, but really aren't here to see the deals that you and I look out the window or one desk over and can see and feel the excitement. So those are the new activities for us for the coming year. We are the most active seed fund in upstate New York now, and we intend to continue on that path. But we also appreciate that in the new millennium, it's a different kind of investment environment. The traditional environment is you go to sort of a high-end location to watch a pitch or closed door with a select group of people, and that's how the investments were getting done. With new technologies, obviously a lot's happening online, and we're very excited to help Buffalo actually have those kinds of resources and connect to our partners throughout the region. For high-growth businesses, these are global businesses ultimately, so the notion that we're going to reach out beyond Buffalo is something that is just a normal part of our activity every day.
One of the things you guys do on a monthly basis, which I think is great, is the launch hour on social media. I participated in one last year. I had a blast doing it and coming up with answers and stuff. So thank you for the invite. Why is things like that so important? Just getting people in the conversation going.
Nate, I think you said it earlier. What you and I just breathe every day. Take the most basic element of 43 North existing and Launch New York existing. The majority of the world has no idea. So what we do know, and we learned this from our crowdfunding campaign, we did a survey ahead, and we got to expats, people who either went to school in upstate New York or had lived here, and we asked them, how interested are you in participating in supporting this environment? We could not believe how excited people were, yes, sometimes to donate, which is how our current seed fund works, but half the people said, I want to help, I want to invest. I realized from that experiment, if you will, that we don't have an effective way to let them participate and support what we're doing. And so for the most part, if they're not seeing it in the media, and certainly the work you're doing with the podcasts and us with the Twitter chats and the rest of our digital communications and some traditional communications, those are the only places that they can see what is happening. Then the question is, how do I get involved? So two things I'd really like to let people make sure they're knowing about and tapping into. So upstartny.org is a site that we started as the first digital entrepreneurship magazine for Western New York. So we do specifically focus in the Buffalo region, all the way from Main Street businesses to high growth. So you can learn about the West Side Bazaar and what's happening in the neighborhoods, all the way to some of the Rachel's Remedies and 3 a.m. and other companies you and I have talked about. And what's exciting there is just taste it. Our goal is to increase awareness, inspire, educate, and actually engage people. So if you go to that website, whether you're an entrepreneur looking for resources or someone just wanting to know what's in the region, there is a resource network, and it's a directory, an online directory, but it will tell you who has funding, who has facilities, who has all the other resources you need. I totally appreciate that a directory by itself doesn't talk to you, but in fact, we have people like on your team and on my team that can actually help people navigate to figure out which of those resources would be most helpful, or for those interested in maybe joining a company, investing in a company, or just learning more. We're doing those kinds of phone calls and email communications with folks every single week. But it's, Nate, you and I, it's still not enough.
Yeah.
We need everybody out there to help get the word out.
All right. And how else can people do that? And wrapping things up, aside from upstartny.gov or .org rather, following LaunchNY on social media, how can people get involved, and how can startups get on the radar of LaunchNY?
Yeah, great question. So first of all, visiting LaunchNY.org is very helpful if you're trying to find out what are we about. Obviously the social media as well, but at our website there's a couple of key tools there. We too have a resource network geared a little bit more towards the high growth versus the Main Street businesses, but again, very, very helpful for people to navigate. So if you're interested as an entrepreneur, if you go to our site, right at the top of the page, there's an apply button. You can, click into that and apply online. And the good news is we set aside several client intake call slots every single week. So many times people will come to me first. Ultimately, they got to go through the website. This is how we make sure that we're following up on everybody. So all you really need to do is go to the website, click through. You can read the criteria that I talked about for high growth. If you're not sure, apply. And it's a very quick couple-minute online interview. Danielle from our team will be in touch and set you up for a call typically within a week. And at that point, we talk and we ask you questions, you ask us questions, and we don't currently have contracts for our clients. This is really, sort of here's how we work together. And until we actually get to an investment point, I will note that probably more than half of the people who apply on our site will say, I just need money. Well, that's rarely the case, right? Yeah. And we want to make sure that you're spending the money on the right things so that other investors, our goal is to make you investment ready. So we do require 3 months of working with our mentors, one or more of them, before you can apply for the seed fund. And all of this is really just to prepare you for the big show of getting all these other investors that we know you'll need beyond our seed capital. So that's a pretty quick and easy way for potential clients to get involved. If you're otherwise interested, we certainly have the newsletter sign up, and then, like everybody, in info@launchny.org. But I certainly welcome people to contact me. All of our email addresses, if you click through our bios on the team pictures, you'll be able to get to each of us. And, honestly, I do those phone calls all the time because people still, as you and I have said, just don't have a good feel for exactly how much exciting activity there is here.
All right, Marnie.
Welcome people to contact me, and I sure appreciate you having me with you today.
I appreciate you joining me today, and we'll have you on down the road and
Excellent.
Catch up again. We'll talk to you soon.
Great. Thanks, Nate.
Cheers. I want to thank Marnie for joining me on the podcast. You can head on over to LaunchNY.org to learn more about LaunchNY. Subscribe to their newsletter. They produce a great newsletter with all the things that kind of happen on a monthly basis here in the Buffalo startup scene, everything they're doing, other organizations are doing, and it's a great way to stay up to date. Head on over to 43north.org, sign up for our newsletter too. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Podbean, or your favorite podcasting app. And one little piece of house cleaning for those listeners, you know what I'm about to say next. Head on over to iTunes and give a 5-star review of this podcast. Leave a review. Let me know what you think of this podcast, because the only way this podcast gets better is if you tell me how to make it better. Let me know. Shoot me an email, podcast@43north.org. Let me know who you want on this show. Let me know if you want more bad dad jokes. And just let me know what you think. I like feedback. Constructive feedback. Don't just troll me. I don't like trolls. Even though I'm a troll myself sometimes, but it's a different podcast. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. For 43 North, I'm Nate Benson, and we'll see you at the next one. Oh, I almost forgot. What did I tell you in the beginning of the episode? March 28th, 6 to 8 p.m., 640 Ellicott Street, downtown Buffalo, the 43 North Incubator, Latitude Live, a live edition of this podcast with 2017 43 North winner Eva Masood from Terra AI. It's going to be a great conversation with a great startup founder. You don't want to miss out. Head on over to 43north.org and reserve your free tickets now.